Hi, Ben here, and welcome back to another Work in Progress Wednesday. I can't believe how quick the weeks are going at the moment, and somebody emailed the other day to say how many weeks we are away from Christmas, so that kind of scared me a little bit. But another productive day in the workshop ahead. We've got lots of gluing to do today. So on this bench we've got some carving tools that we've got prepared. So we've got a few different models. So we've got some engraving knives, some crook knives, and some of our favourites are these little field knives with the lovely little antler handles. So Lois has made some lovely sheaths for those, so I've got to finish those off today. So basically it's going to be a big glue up session today. So we're going to glue those up a little bit later, but first of all I want to glue up a woodlander because the epoxy that we use for that takes a little bit longer to cure, so we'll head over to the other bench. So this is pretty much where I work on all the full Tang knives, this bench. So I've got a woodlander blade prepared at the moment. So this has got the final grinds on there, and basically what I've got to do now is to protect me and protect the blade. We need to put a little bit of masking tape on there, and I've changed masking tape recently. I used to use the 3M blue tape, which used to be really good, but they must have changed the recipe and it used to stick terrible to the blade. So what I've found now is this Q1 masking tape. One, it's a really funky yellow colour, but it also doesn't stick to the blades so that you have a real hard time getting it off when it's finished. So put a little bit of masking tape on there. Now I'm safe and I'm not going to damage that edge. And I've got some handle scales prepared. So this is actually black canvas micarta with some really nice bright red liners on there. And what you'll see is what I've done on the inside of the handle scales is I've put all these little divots on the inside. This is to give a bit of key for the epoxy to sort of bite into and give a bit more surface area. So they're already prepared, and what I like to do is just have a little check just before I put the counterbore holes in for the loveless bolts. I like to always just have a little bit of a dry run. At this stage you can sometimes tweak the holes if it's not going together properly, but once you've drilled those counterbore holes you're sort of set really. So make sure there's no gaps. It's looking really good, and as you can see there's a little bit of excess material that will get ground off when the knife's all dried and ready for shaping. So I'm pretty happy with that. So the final job just before I glue up is we're going to put those little counterbore holes in. So we'll walk down the bench, and I've got my little step drill set up. Put my hoover on, and we can counterbore those holes. Puts those counterbores in. So that's put that little counterbore in, so it's left a little bit of extra material at the very base of the hole. That's going to basically create the shelf that the loveless bolt is going to sit up against and pull the handle material really tight against the tang of the knife. What I like to do just to help the bolts go in, because you're going to be covered in epoxy in a minute, is to use a little drill with a countersink and just take off those fluffy bits, just like so, and that will help that bolt go in there. Clean it with some acetone before we do the epoxy. So time to actually prepare the blade and the handle material now. So sort of cleaning the materials with acetone is really important to get rid of any grease or WD-40 and things like that. So I've got my acetone at the back of the bench. So first of all what I do is I clean the inside of the handle scales, just in case you've got a bit of WD-40 or something like that on there, and you want to make sure that that's absolutely spotlessly clean of all kind of grease and debris, even the grease from your fingers. That's why I'm wearing gloves at this stage, not only just to keep me clean from the glue, but also to stop my fingers putting any grease on there as well. So then I clean the tang of the knife as well, so make sure that's nice and grease free. And what I've done is I've cleaned all the fittings. I put those in a jar with some acetone to make sure there's no grease left from the cutting of the taps and of the threads in the actual sleeve nuts themselves. Now these are stainless. I do use brass loveless bolts as well, but this is a stainless blade, so I tend to put stainless fittings on a stainless blade, so you've got a totally waterproof knife. Now we can place this knife blade in my vise. I've got some soft jaws on there as well, so it doesn't hurt the blade itself. And what I've got is I've got my little mixing sort of place on my bench, which is sort of grown in thickness over the years with the excess epoxy. Now what I use is G-Flex epoxy. This is really good, high quality, sort of marine quality epoxy, so it makes a very, very strong bond, but also creates a waterproof seal between the handle material and the blade. Now you mix this basically equal parts of resin and hardener. Some people weigh it, but what you'll find is the actual resin and hardener have got different weights, so if you weigh it you might get the proportions wrong. So equal amounts by volume is actually what you need, and we'll give that a good mix. Now like I say, this takes a lot longer to cure than the other epoxy that we use on the carving tools. This has got like a working time of probably about 45 minutes, which is great for when you come to glue up a full tang knife, because even though you've had a dry run, you'll probably find things might not go together when you've got the stress of epoxy involved. So give it a good old mix, and then this is where it starts to get a little bit messy. So what I tend to do is get a little bit of epoxy, and we're going to apply a good coating to the inside of the handle scales, making sure we get some in those little epoxy holes that we drilled onto the inside of the handle. So that's that one, and the same on the other. And you don't want to go crazy, you don't want to have like loads of it, because as you attach it to the tang it will squeeze out, but you want to make sure that there's a good coating over the whole surface. And what I tend to do, it might be overkill, but I actually put some on the actual tang of the blade as well. This just means if I've missed any on the handle, I'll make sure that I get it with this amount of glue, just like so, and then I start to put it together. So I want to put a bit of glue in these counterbore holes, and this acts for two purposes really. One, it helps the bolt go in, or the nut go in anyway, the actual sleeve nut of the loveless bolt, but also we're trying to create that waterproof seal again. So I get my first loveless bolt, I even put a little bit on there as well, and then we place that into the hole. Like I say, it's quite a tight fit. I've made sure that the counterbore drill is a real tight fit to those sleeve nuts. And then we get a little bit on the thong tube as well, and that slides in like so. And at this stage, because I've got these two pins sticking out now, I can now place that onto the tang and it's not going to go anywhere. So it gives me a hand free then basically. But when you first start making knives and you start gluing up, you'll find that you'll be like a sort of a kid with a jar of jam almost. You'll be absolutely covered in it. So make sure you've got gloves on and have a few dry runs before you actually get any epoxy near it as well. So I'm doing the same on this side, putting a little bit of glue in those holes. Like I say, you can't really have too much in these holes because any excess will squirt out, and creating that waterproof seal is essential really. So we get one of those little bolts lined up, one of those little sleeve nuts, and then I squeeze it all the way home. This is why I tend to put a bit of tissue down on my bench, because otherwise your bench just gets totally covered in glue. There you go. So we've got those in there. We'll just make sure there's a bit of glue on that thong tube, and then we can start to put it together. And at that stage I sometimes clean just a little bit of excess glue off my hands. And I've got my little screwdriver, which has had lots of use, covered in epoxy now, and I can use that for tightening these bolts. So don't go too fast. in case you strip the thread. It's not quite so important with the stainless bolts because they're a little bit harder, but the brass ones, sometimes if you don't line it up properly, you can mash the thread on the bolt and then it won't go together. So do it sort of incrementally, and you can start to see it's already starting to squeeze some of that epoxy out. Now I've got this set to a torque setting, so when you screw up these Loveless bolts tight, you don't want to do it so much that it squirts all the epoxy out of that bond. You want glue left in there, otherwise it defeats the point really. So I've got this set at about 7 to 8 seems to be about right. So I know that that's not going to be excessively tight, but I know that that's going to make sure that I've squeezed the excess out, but there's still a nice seal all the way around. And what we're really looking for, the most important part, is that this front end of the knife, just here where the handle meets the tang and the blade, we want to see that little bead of epoxy sort of squeezed out, and then we know that we've got a real good seal then. Right, so now is the task of actually cleaning up some of this excess glue, because we need to make sure we clean that now, because if it sets and we leave that glue there and it sets, you're going to have a hell of a job actually cleaning it up. So like I say, I'll clean off some of the excess off my hands so I'm not putting more on than I'm taking off. And the first thing that I do is get a bit of tissue, and I'll move it out so you can see it a little bit easier. But I'm going to come in here and I'm going to clean off that excess there, that front sort of oozings, and do that on both sides. And putting your knife in the vise is a hell of a lot easier than trying to just hold it in your hand, because at this stage you're going to need both hands to make sure that you clean it up without putting more glue on your knife blade. So just take off that excess glue, and the excess off from there, and then at that stage Q-tips or cotton buds are really handy, and I've got a little pot glued to my vise itself with just a little bit of WD-40, and it's important that we clean out any epoxy that's in our thong tube at this stage. So I've got one end dipped in WD-40 and one that's not, and then basically I push that through. That first pass takes out all that excess epoxy, and then I flip it round, and then I use the end that's got the WD-40 on just to clean out any epoxy in there, because we want that to be nice and clean, just like so. So that's that done. And then this is a little top tip for you guys out there. I've got some kitchen roll that I've put a little bit of WD-40 on, and I use that to clean the front of the scales. That helps take off any excess epoxy, and if anything it leaves a very thin film of WD-40 on there, which stops any epoxy actually bonding where it's not supposed to, either on the front of your handle material or the blade itself. And with that same rag I'll just clean these sections of the handle, because I'm actually going to apply a little clamp on there, and if you don't take that epoxy off you'll end up with a knife with all your clamps stuck to it. So I find these little spring clamps really handy. Yeah, I've got quite a few along there ready for glue up, and normally what I do is just to put one on the very butt end of the knife just to help apply a little bit of pressure, and then I actually apply two at this front section of the handle like so. And at that stage you might even find that there might be a little bit more glue that squirts out, and you can just go back and carefully just clean that up again with another cloth with the WD-40 on there, and you should be good to go. Only other thing that I sometimes do, which depends on the handle material and depends how much glue's oozed out, is sometimes I'll just take another cotton bud and just wipe off that excess there, because as it's setting, because it's 45-minute cure time on this epoxy, it can sometimes run down the handle, which is a real pain. So that's all cleaned up, and that's looking pretty ugly at this stage, but what I do then is just place it on a non-stick mat on the back of the bench and just let that cure, and then we'll be able to come back maybe in 4 hours when the glue's started to go really sort of tacky, and if we have got any excess we can then clean that up again, but you have to sort of monitor it at that stage. But yeah, probably tomorrow that will be fully cured, and I can then start thinking about shaping the actual handle itself. So that's what we've been working on this Wednesday. Hope you're enjoying the work in progress Wednesdays. We've had lots of nice comments saying that you're enjoying seeing what we're up to each week, so we'll continue with our sort of projects that we're on. And remember to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.